Before I begin my project and talking about how I did all this research, I just wanted to quickly explain how I got into data visualization. So I'm a student in Capital News Service, which is a wire reporting service run by the Philip Merrill College of Journalism. There's 4 bureaus. There's one in Annapolis, one in DC, a broadcast bureau in College Park, and a newer data visualization lab. I joined the data visualization lab after getting a little bit into coding, and I wanted to take some time to work on more computational journalism projects, and this kind of gave me an opportunity to do so. So back to Uber. I take Uber all the time. As a college student, it's super convenient and quick to get around going to DC or just to another neighborhood in College Park, because College Park's not super safe on its own at night, so it's nice to have this easy way of getting around. And it's really cheap when you split the cost with friends. But sometimes when you open the app, you see the surge prices, and they're outrageous. You might see a 2x, 4x, even 9 times the normal fares when prices are surging. And maybe you've paid those fares yourself, or you've just read about them in an article. Uber claims its price goes up to encourage more drivers to get on the road. And according to the company, the increase in price is proportional to the number of drivers on the road, and to the increase in demand. The project I did with Christine Rice is an analysis of this dynamic pricing system. We wanted to find out if it was really just an example of the classic supply and demand model, or if there was something else to it. We want to answer the question that a lot of Uber riders have, including ourselves. Do you bother waiting to see if the price is going to drop, or do you just accept the surge as is? So how many people know what an API is? Okay, good. Most people do. But for the few of you who don't, or the few of you who won't admit that you don't know what it is, I didn't know what it was a few months ago, so it's okay. It is an application programming interface, which basically means it's a set of programming instructions or protocols for building a software application. It acts kind of like a middleman between the programmer and the application, as it takes requests from a user and returns data for that person to use for a project. Companies like Twitter, Google, Amazon offer their public APIs so outside developers can build products using their services. And APIs are also incredibly useful for journalists, as we learned, because they get access to so much data. So Uber opened its API to developers in August of last year, and that's right around the time that Christine and I were getting started with our Capital News Service project. And at the time, the API allowed users to explore endpoints such as the estimated wait time to get a car, the number of cars available, what the surge price was at the time, things like that. And since we've completed that project, there's actually a lot more that you can use access through the API, so we're going to do a little bit more research into that now. So we wanted to see how the surge multiplier varied across different car types in DC. These are the 4 car types you can request. The cheapest being Uber X, and then Uber Black is kind of the more stylish version of that. So if you want to take a Mercedes or something instead of a Toyota Camry. So we picked 5 locations in DC. We wanted to see what kinds of neighborhoods might predict more interesting results. Adams Morgan, for example, has a really popular nightlife, and then we also wanted to look at something like George Washington University to see how a university campus might be different. And like I said, we had no prior experience with APIs, and we had a lot of data analysis ahead of us. So fortunately, one of our professors, Nick Diakopoulos, who's not here today, helped us out by writing the Python code to actually access and use the API. Christine and I then used MySQL to parse more than 2 million rows of data that we collected in a month or so. So we made calls to the API every 15 seconds for a few weeks to kind of get a sense of when and how often the prices were peaking in a day. And it might be a little hard to see here. Our research showed that prices tended to surge more in the morning and at night, which is a little different than what we were expecting, because the neighborhoods we chose, we were expecting to see more surging at night when people are going out to dinner or to the bars. And also, unsurprisingly to us, they tended to surge before, during, and after events. So this slide, for example, shows a graph of UberX prices changing on a Saturday in Navy Yard. There was a craft beer fest that day, and so you can see from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. there's just crazy peaks throughout that time. So in our actual project, you're able to toggle between the car type and the day of the week, so you can see how the search multiplier changes in each neighborhood. And I'll tweet a link after the presentation so you can use it for yourself if you're interested. So we thought 15 seconds was quick enough to see the fluctuations in the price, but just to check, we decided to do a second test and call the API every single second, just in case we were missing something. So this graph here shows a little bit more in-depth look at U Street on a Friday night. And we thought the neighborhood's big nightlife scene would affect the multiplier more at night, but fares actually peak the highest in the morning, with the exception of an Uber SUV. And I think just anecdotally, that's because more people tend to, like larger groups will get an SUV at night to come home from the bars. But otherwise, it's the morning that's like the highest time for Uber. And our analysis, along with a bit more of recent research released by other news outlets, shows that UberX tends to be cheaper than a DC taxi when there's no surge multiplier. Every city is different, of course, and that depends on state laws, other regulations for ride-hailing services. In New York City, for example, Uber tends to be more expensive than a taxi, but places like Chicago and Baltimore, Uber is generally cheaper. So this was a challenging project for us since we were new to programming world and doing data journalism. So we faced a lot of challenges, many of which were beyond our control. For example, we noticed that Uber's algorithm actually changed while we were collecting data. It went from incrementing by 1/2 to incrementing by 1/10, and we don't really know the reason for that yet. But so that kind of like caused us to like have to go back and do some more research on that. We also had a few gaps in our data when we were parsing all the rows. There was like 30, 90, even 14,000 second gaps between certain points. We weren't really sure the cause of that, whether that was an issue in our code or something on with Uber servers. But we were still able to draw a few conclusions that I'll get to in a minute. Another challenge we faced was how much data we could collect at once. We wanted to study more than just DC. We wanted to look at a few cities across the country. But unfortunately, Uber sets a limit to how much data you can collect at once. So even when we just focused on DC, we had to limit the neighborhoods that we were looking at, and we had to open several different developer accounts to collect all this information. Our biggest takeaway from the project is that while Uber prices can be absurdly high, as you've probably read in articles, when the surge multiplier is in effect, they won't stay that way for long. It's almost never necessary to accept surge pricing. Fares almost always drop within a few minutes, sometimes even just seconds, as we found. So for example, just anecdotally, on Valentine's Day this year, I was just checking the Uber app every so often to see like how prices were surging, because a lot of articles showed people complaining about the high prices on Halloween or New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. So I was seeing fares jumping 2x, 4x. I think the highest I saw was 7.1x. But when my friend and I were ready to come back from DC back to College Park, we didn't pay a single surge multiplier. We paid the regular fare just because we waited an extra 4 minutes. I think it dropped from like 6x back down to 1 in 4 minutes. So that's great. So the next time you see an outrageous surge, just check back in 5 minutes or even less, and that can make all the difference in how much you're paying to get to your next destination. And then just like a quick side note, Nick Diakopoulos, the professor who helped us set up the API, just recently made that publicly available. So if you're interested in doing the actual exploration yourself, I'll tweet out a link to that as well.